Welcome to $100 Plus Mileage. This is the podcast about the roughly 1,000 bills that work their way through the New Hampshire Legislature each year. We cover the controversial, the lesser known, and everything in between. We're here to talk about these bills and the issues that they relate to, and their pros and cons, and talk about how they could impact your life. I'm Mike Dunbar, content editor for Citizens Count.
And I'm Anna Brown, director of research and analysis for Citizens Count. It's hard to think of a New Hampshire issue that impacts more people than the current housing shortage. Whether you're a renter or you own your own home, the limited availability of housing in New Hampshire likely affects your finances directly or indirectly. As housing costs increase, the need for workforce housing in particular has come into focus. This year, the legislature is considering a large piece of legislation, SB 400, which is meant to address the problem. The bill has been championed by Governor Sununu and contains a slew of programs and incentives aimed at increasing the supply of workforce housing. For the purposes of this podcast, we're focusing on just one of the more contentious parts of SB 400, the quote-unquote Housing Champion Certification Program.
Okay, good. I was afraid you wanted us to try and talk about the entire bill, but that would be like a 5-hour podcast from what I understand.
I do lay it out in a summary on the Citizens Count website if you want to search for SB 400.
Sure.
And yeah, I forget, it's something like 13 parts, 20 parts, 300 parts. There's a whole lot of programs there.
My gosh.
And we're not going to talk about all of them, but we're going to focus on this section because it stirred up some controversy. And I think it's as good a place as any to focus on.
All right. We like a bit of controversy. So why don't you tell us about it?
The Housing Champion Certification Program, as laid out in SB 400, would encourage municipalities to promote the development of workforce housing and quote-unquote other types of housing necessary for the economic development of the state. Doesn't really go further in detail there. So towns and cities that receive this certification would get preferential access to state resources, including discretionary state infrastructure funds.
Okay, so who would be in charge of making these rules?
The Office of Planning and Development would be responsible for the exact qualifications and procedures for a municipality to earn this Housing Champion certification, but the bill does lay out some general guidelines. In order to earn the certification, towns and cities would need to adopt policies that promote workforce housing. So the bill specifically mentions adopting land use regulations and ordinances that encourage the development of workforce housing, establishing municipal economic development and revitalization districts, adopting energy efficiency residential building standards, training local zoning and planning board officials, and more. The legislation would also establish a special advisory board to oversee this program and review and approve proposed rule changes. The board would include legislators, various community stakeholders. I think there's representatives for realtors, developers, et cetera. Certification would be valid for 3 years, and municipalities could renew their certification every 3 years.
Okay, this all sounds definitely interesting. And I recall that this bill generally is a big priority for Governor Sununu, right?
Absolutely. So Governor Sununu mentioned SB 400 by name in his State of the State address in February, and he really cherry-picked a small number of bills. And along with the Housing Champion Certification Program, SB 400 contains changes meant to speed up planning board approvals for new housing projects, add other tax incentives, create those training materials for local officials, so on. But the bill has hit legislative headwinds. Since the governor has made it clear the bill is a priority for him, and also the Senate passed the bill with a lot of support, some on the House have seen this as an opportunity to add in their conservative policy objectives. So some other potentially unrelated legislation. And also, there's quite a few representatives who oppose the Housing Champion Certification Program, which we're going to be digging into. They voted to strip that part of the bill. The bill is most likely headed to a conference committee to see if the House and Senate can negotiate a final version that they both like.
That's so interesting. So basically, you're saying some legislators have seen this as their chance, because it's such a priority for him, to just kind of tack on whatever they really want onto this bill, which of course then it's the whole sausage making part of legislating, I guess. So what do proponents argue when it comes to this proposal?
Supporters say it is necessary to incentivize municipalities to take steps to increase housing. According to a report from New Hampshire Housing, we're in the Granite State short about 20,000 housing units. This lack of housing contributes to the critical workforce shortage in New Hampshire as well. However, towns and cities are often reluctant to increase workforce housing due to concerns about the impact on water and sewer infrastructure, safety services, and schools. Housing Champion certified municipalities could gain access to money to develop their systems to handle this greater residential density. Supporters are also quick to point out that this program would be entirely voluntary. This sort of development might not make sense for every town, but the certification would help direct state resources to the towns that will use the money.
Okay, but we said earlier that this was controversial, so not everybody agrees with those sentiments.
Oh, yeah. Some people say this is not right for New Hampshire, specifically because there's this tradition of local control, and they're worried that you're getting some problems with state control. So some feel the wording of the legislation leaves details of the program too open-ended. For example, the bill states, quote unquote, the procedure for a municipality to earn the New Hampshire Housing Champion certification shall be based on a scoring system. But there's almost no explanation of what the scoring system would look like, how many points there would be, or how exactly the points would be awarded. So this means the procedure for scoring would be developed by unelected officials at the Office of Planning and Development. There are similar concerns that the advisory board that oversees the program gives too much representation to special interest groups and developers. Some opponents fear this could lead to an unfair distribution of state funding or even backdoor deals. Others argue that consideration should be made for towns that already made these important investments.
All right. Well, it definitely sounds like this could have people fired up on both sides. Do you have an opinion on this issue, listeners at home? Well, this proposal is just one of the many proposals that are found within SB 400. It's important to let your legislators know how you feel about it. So as legislators continue to work on this bill, just make sure you tell them whether you think this part of it should be kept or removed. They can do either. Get started by finding out who represents you at citizenscount.org. All right, Ann, it's time for Only in New Hampshire. What Granite State trivia do you have for us?
So this is mostly just a fun little factoid this week. Did you know the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. was built from more than 30,000 tons of New Hampshire granite? So was Boston's Quincy Market and countless of other monuments and landmark structures throughout the world. So basically, the Granite State, we've just kind of put our rocky mark all over this planet, including in DC. And I think that's pretty cool.
That's excellent branding on the Granite State's part.
Well, is it though? Because I had to tell you this factoid about it. I feel like it would be excellent branding if everyone was like, look at that New Hampshire granite. I feel there's really not enough recognition.
If every stone was marked with like a trademark, like New Hampshire
granite.
Yeah,
or like a better like social media marketing campaign, or maybe like a jingle or a slogan or something to really remember that, you know, that it's New Hampshire granite, not just any other rock. Come on.
Right. Yeah. The 18th century was not up on its social media game. I can tell. Yeah, and it kind of ties into what we were talking about, was it last week, with the flag that has the piece of granite? The state flag has a piece of granite.
Yes, the slab of rock in front of the very doomed ship.
Okay,
yes.
So see, it all ties together here. All right, well, that wraps it up for today's episode, but you can find more information and episodes at citizenscount.org. We'd like to thank Franklin Pierce University for producing and the Granite State News Collaborative for hosting. Our theme music is composed by Mike Dunbar. And lastly, we thank you for giving us a listen and thinking about how you can be a part of what makes New Hampshire by the people, for the people.